Today I'm going to reveal to you all the truth about pain. Ooh, oh, so enticing. What a curiosity gap I've created there. But real quick, two things. Housekeeping. First is thank you to all of you who gave feedback on the first me talking unscripted video. I appreciate it. Second, for those of you who express concern about like, I don't like this kind of video, it's too long, it's too much to pay attention. I will continue to make my other kinds of content, but just to give some context to like why I am making these videos now, started to feel like a lot of my videos were too like mechanical in the sense that many of you don't really know at all my personality. I don't really let my personality come through when I'm talking about biomechanics of anything. And I don't know, I'd like to think I'm like a semi-interesting person. I guess on the surface, like pretty boring. But I think everyone is interesting in some ways. And so I'm just going to use these videos as an opportunity to like be myself so that those of you who care at all about that maybe get to know me a bit more. There's nothing between me and you, the camera, and whoever's, whoever you are on the other side that is currently being faked. Like this is authentic Ben. And I want to just put that out because I feel like that's what we need more of. I feel like fitness culture especially, but society at large now needs less of like the brain dead, brain rot, over editing stuff and a little bit just more like real people doing real things, talking to real cameras, to real people on the other side of such cameras. So I'm just going to kind of like let myself be myself. And if you don't like that, I am sorry to hear that. But anyway, yeah, so that's context. So I'll continue to make my normal, like, this is, Teacher Ben videos. And yeah, I do this thing where I make myself laugh often. So you'll start to see that because I spend a lot of time alone in this office that you now see, which by the way is new. We moved apartments recently. Anyhow, let's get to the topic today. I won't by the way, preface all of these videos as I've just prefaced this one. I just want to kind of do it once for those of you who are here, the real ones, and then, in the future, I can address anything personal. If you all have questions about personal stuff, I'm happy to talk about that as well. Okay, so what's the truth about pain? So a lot of the feedback that I got on my first talking head video, which I posted yesterday as of this recording, was it was really interesting because many of you were like, oh, I've had similar experiences with like the concept of the mobility panacea. And if you haven't seen the video, first of all, I would watch it because I think it's great. I think it's okay. I think most of what I do is just okay. But the very, very brief 2-sentence summary of that video is basically like, the reason I have an anti-mobility training bias is because I feel like people get really consumed by certain narratives in a way that is fear-based. So people will use language like limitation or weakness or tightness as a way to describe how they perceive themselves and their bodies, when in reality, the foundation of that perspective is kind of nonsensical. So for instance, if I say like, oh, I have shoulder rotation that is limited, right? It's like limited relative to what? You're basically just saying, I need to get to an arbitrary place. And if I can't get there, therefore I'm dysfunctional, broken, or whatever, laundry list of negative terms. And so that's sort of the basis for my bias against the mobility stuff. It also applies to things like asymmetry, things like posture, things like anterior pelvic tilt and pronated feet, and the list goes on. And so how that's related to today, because today is kind of like, I want to build off of that, is that I feel like a lot of people's motivation to do mobility related stuff and to address like posture related stuff is actually rooted in pain. Now, some of the time people just don't like the way that they look, from the perspective that, Maybe someone has forward shoulders. Oh no, I have forward shoulders. Or maybe one shoulder sits slightly higher than the other. Oh no, I have an asymmetrical presentation, right? And none of that, again, in and of itself, we can accurately say is inherently problematic, but some people just don't like the visual of it. Just to briefly touch on that, because I think it's just worth addressing. If you think something is visually unattractive, but it is part of your posture, my advice to you is to try just try to get over it. Number one. Number two, if you feel like you can't get over it, and maybe this is like you can do this in tandem with getting over it, build muscle. Most problems, in my experience with clients, with myself, that I have not liked visually have been resolved building more muscle. So let me just give one example personally. I used to not like the way that my shoulder blades sat on my back and looked on my back. It looked like they were kind of too pokey, like they were like, forward tipping. And from the back, they were kind of poking out. And then I just built more muscle. And then now they don't look that way because there's muscle there. So that's one example. You could just build muscle and get over it. You could do both simultaneously. In fact, building muscle may help you get over it. Okay. So I've gone tangential. This is typically what happens when I talk this way. So apologies, or maybe not if you're enjoying it. Anyway, the whole topic of pain and how that's related to this is because I feel like many people apply these modalities, are concerned about these things. The vast majority of people are concerned about these things because they think that it's going to give them pain. So if I have forward shoulders, I should be concerned, right? Because that will give me pain. Or if I have one shoulder up and, that's my bad shoulder, then like that must be because it's higher than this one. So all those topics, posture, asymmetry, lacking mobility, they're all related to the pain conversation ultimately. Like if you just trace the argument down deep enough, you end up usually at one of two things. I don't like how this looks, or pain. So we're going to focus on pain today. So a little bit of pain history. And no, this will not be a long-winded, boring history of pain. And for any of you, by the way, who are very familiar with pain research or who are pain experts, physical therapists, please correct me in the comments if anything you think I'm saying is totally off base. But as a general, just to generally outline what has happened to our understanding of pain over the last several decades, basically, the way we used to think about pain was we used to imagine, and many people still think this, by the way, this is the consensus is slowly sort of shifting. But the idea of pain and the perspective on pain used to be like, we basically looked at the human body as if it were like a car or a house or any just like very black and white mechanical system, right? So if you have a problem with your car, or something in your house is broken, you go to the car mechanic and you're like, bro, what's wrong with my car? Identify it, fix that shit. And then hopefully the car mechanic's like, oh, it's this thing. And we're just going to replace that part. And then you leave, you go about your day, and that's the end of it, right? Or you pay someone to come to your house. Maybe your toilet is broken or your bidet is not working. All of you should have a bidet, by the way. Just as an aside, someone comes, fixes the toilet, great. Okay, so we used to think that pain in the body was like that, where, you have a particular pain and you're like, ooh, ouchie, ouch, ooh. And then what you did was you went to physical therapy or you saw a doctor and the doctor was like, oh, all we need to do is make this tissue stronger or loosen this tissue up or this tissue is weak, right? The reversion to the simple narrative, which is how people would arrive at ideas like, oh, that's why posture is bad, right? If my neck hurts, it must be because I am cluck, cluck, a chicken neck or something like that, right? Or if my shoulder hurts, it must be because one is higher than the other. And so hopefully that's making sense, right? The old perspective on pain, I believe the technical term for this is like pathokinesiology, whatever. It was basically this very simple math of like, if pain, then something structurally wrong. That's basically, in summary, what it was. So if my elbow hurts, it's because my elbow has damage and I need to heal that damage. And that, by the way, is still the perspective that many, many people had. This is the perspective that I had until a few years ago. And what it leads people to conclude are reductionistic things like I've just described. If X, then because Y. But in recent times, now the transition here to the modern era of pain understanding, people who are up to date on pain literature will know this. People who are not up to date on literature will think that this is hocus pocus nonsense and that I am shilling for big PT or something. Our current understanding of pain basically says, whoa, whoa, whoa. Hey, that stuff that you just described, Ben, is valuable, but there's this whole other thing, which is not directly related, and which makes the whole thing way more fucking complex. And I mean complex. I don't mean complicated. Many people, as an aside, they use the words complicated and complex interchangeably, which I think is fine for the most part. Like, colloquially, it's fine to use either interchangeably, but like when you're talking about something empirical, just for those of you, oh, my hair is like a little bit too flat today. Just for those of you who don't know, complicated is like, you know, an example of something that's complicated would be the car example, right? It's like, it is complicated to figure out, you know, what the broken part is or how to fix the part, but ultimately there is a correct answer. 2 + 2 is in fact 4. Unless you're talking to some wacko nut job who goes on popular podcasts and tells you that 2 + 2 is 5 or something. Okay. So anyway, that's what complicated is. Complex doesn't mean, you know, oh, long division is hard. I just have to figure it out. And then once I know it, I know it. No, complex means that there is some degree of error that you can't account for. So human beings are complex. And what that means is that you can't predict the way that people will respond to things. If I give a stimulus to 2 different people, let's say I give 100 milligrams of caffeine, 1 cup of coffee, approximately 94 milligrams is, I believe, a cup, to 2 people may have very different reactions. Person A might respond with a really high, you know, spike in heart rate. Person B, nothing may happen, right? Depends on so many different things, and that's the point. That's what complex means. Okay, so what's the point of me bringing that up? Well, pain, we understand now to be complex, which means, for example, that if someone has that elbow ouchie and you take a scan of that elbow area that hurts, whether or not you find actual damage to those tissues does not directly correlate with the pain outcome. So what does that mean? Well, it basically means that if I have elbow ouchie, I could do every scan on my elbow known to man, and I might not find any structural issue. It might look, for all intents and purposes, like a perfect elbow, perfect structure. But alas, I still might have pain in that structure. And conversely, I may have no pain in my elbow, and I take a scan for whatever reason. Let's just imagine I'm getting a scan for fun. I may have some kind of apparent structural damage. So this presents a weird situation where people who have pain might not actually have structural issues as defined by the old models of pain. But people who don't have pain might actually have tissue damage, things that look like they're fucked up, for lack of a better description. So what does this actually mean? Well, this means, and this I'll get to why this actually matters and how this can actually impact you, because it impacts you greatly, whether you know it or not. This matters because it lets us know that, like, hey, pain is not such a simple story. And from an evolutionary perspective, the way that you can understand pain, the way that it makes sense to understand pain, is that pain is basically like threat response. So if you're like, you know, man living thousands of years ago, okay, many thousands of years ago, and you're wandering around the forest and you hear a rustle in the bush. Oh no. And maybe, you know, when you hear the rustle in the bush, you get scared, right? So maybe like something alerts you, and maybe like you move your shoulders and like you get like this very, very subtle pain response. Okay. That subtle pain response, many people don't think about pain this way, but like you could get a pain response from like being surprised, right? There's like almost like a painful sensation in your gut that can occur upon seeing something scary. The person who had that pain response survives because they see the rustle in the bush. Oh no, it's a bear. I should run. Okay. The person who doesn't have the pain response is like just chilling and then gets eaten by the bear. A more direct and understandable and maybe sensible, reasonable explanation for that might just be, oh, I have pain. That might mean that like I should stay away from loading that thing so that it doesn't get hurt more if there actually is tissue damage. Okay. So if I have pain in my shoulder, maybe I shouldn't try to bench press my max effort today because there might actually be something structurally wrong with my shoulder and I should actually pay attention to that. So this addition of the complex on top of the complicated does not mean that structural issues and structural deficiencies, we might say, or structural abnormalities don't matter. Of course they matter. It's just to say that it is not the only cause of pain or the only cause for concern. Okay? So back to the evolutionary thing. Pain is a signal that, again, lets us know that, like, okay, there's some kind of threat. Okay, so in modern day, that plays out weirdly because there's this sort of mismatch between the way that we're living today and the way that we lived many thousands of years ago. So for instance, you can have pain in your neck, chronic neck pain, for a host of different reasons, some of which may be related to the physical, some may of which be related to, your psychological stress. So there's so many inputs to this pain conversation that to whittle it down simply to the idea that like if you have pain, then it's just like you're basically a car and I'm going to fix you, right? That is a thing of the past, at least in circles of people who currently understand and have read the body of research or understand broadly the body of research on the pain literature. Okay, so what is the implication of this and why does it actually matter? Why is it important? Well, if you think about how you navigate your own pain situations, again, I will repeat because this is important for me to repeat, that this is not to say that there aren't structural issues or that if you get hurt or if you're in pain that something structural isn't happening, because it's very likely that in many cases there has to be almost by definition a mechanical influence. But it is to say that if you do have pain, that you don't need to freak out and assume a whole bunch of things that are purely sort of mechanical, physical about the pain. So how does this relate to the mobility conversation and the conversation of asymmetry and posture? Well, basically this lets us know that because pain is multivariate, because there are myriad influences related to pain, that if you look at someone and you say, I have ouchie here, and you point to a spot, it does mean that you should not, and I'm comfortable saying that you should not. This is my advice to you. You should not assume that you can identify the cause of that pain like this. So when you go up to someone and you're like, my shoulder is just, and the person says, oh, Jimmy, the reason that's there is because that shoulder that you pointed to that was hurt is actually, it's actually a little bit higher, right? It's higher than this one. And so that's why it hurts, right? That is the definition of a reductionist statement. How do you know? How do you know? Why is it that, maybe for your entire life, you had this slightly higher shoulder, but you didn't have that pain, right? And why is it that like if someone else were to come to you with pain in this shoulder, right? Let's say instead of this one, imagine this shoulder were the higher one and this shoulder were the lower one, and I had pain in this shoulder. Well, what then? Well, what people normally do is they just flip the narrative to fit whatever they come up with. So if I came to you and this shoulder were higher and this shoulder were lower, and I said I have pain in this shoulder, you might say, oh, well, that's actually because this one's lower, right? Well, like, wait a minute. With that other person, you said this one hurt because it was higher. Now you're saying if it's lower, that can also be a cause? Oh, wait, you just pulled both of those things out of your ass, didn't you? Gotcha, right? Okay, so what's the point? The point is, if you are oversimplifying your pain in that particular way, okay, you may understand and identify part of the story. Okay. But what people do is they use those assumptions and they take those assumptions and those narratives and they put them on a pedestal and they start applying it not only to themselves but all other people. And the reason that this is harmful is for the reasons I discussed in the first sort of longer form off the cuff video related to subscribing to particular narratives. So if you subscribe to a particular narrative about why it is that you have pain, you may be chasing something that is so far from being truth tracking that you can't even imagine anything that would be farther away from what might actually help you. So for instance, I will use a personal anecdote to supplement this conversation. For a very long time, I used to assume that I had my left lower back pain. I had this bout of like really bad, like sciatic type nerve pain for 6 to 8 months. It was probably 5 years ago now. Yeah, 5 years ago. And it lasted for a long time. And I assumed that it was because, are you ready for this? I assumed it was because my left hip could not internally rotate as much as my right hip. So what did I do? Well, again, let's just tie this all in a nice little knot here. The reason I'm talking about pain as a complex phenomenon and why I'm talking to all of you about the history of pain and how it's changed from this simple mechanical conversation to this one that is more complex and has many other unpredictable factors, is that I assumed that my issue was this mechanical problem of my left hip did not have enough degrees of internal rotation. And so what did I do? I chased that goal over and over and over and over, months and months and months and months. And I just said, Ben, you're working your way in that direction, brother. This is the answer. Lo and behold, I did that for more than half a year. Imagine yourself. I want you all to imagine this. Okay, come closer. Imagine making an assumption like that and chasing that goal for 6 months of your life and being so blinded. And this was about the time that I was like, I knew at least a fair amount about the anatomy and stuff, but I didn't have this other sort of part of the conversation understood. So I chased that goal of left hip internal rotation for months and months and months and months and months, and all to no avail. And eventually, you know when my pain went away? My pain went away. Hopefully I'll remember correctly. I want to say about 2 weeks after I just gave up. Okay? I don't know the cause of my pain, and frankly, right now, I don't give a shit. There were so many other things that were happening at the time. It was like when COVID was sort of starting up, and there were so many influences that the whole point of me saying this is that I was basically chasing this thing that I set out as the target. And lo and behold, I had no actual substantiated empirical rationale for chasing such a target. And when I started to learn about all this pain stuff, of course, in retrospect, it's easy to rewrite history and look at things in a way that is very filtered. But the point of all this is just basically to say that if you have, say, chronic pain, like I had in my low back, that is something that you may consider. Again, I will repeat because it is important. It does not mean that there is not a mechanical influence. There is always a mechanical influence. The point of this video is just to say that the truth about pain is that there is not just a mechanical influence. In fact, there is always a mechanical influence, and there is always some sort of emotional, psychological, social influence. And if you weigh one of those two things too heavily, bad shit starts to happen. Bad outcomes start to happen. Much like in any other scenario, you start to weigh any individual variable too much at the cost of ignoring all others. What happens? You become blinded to all of the myriad variables that you may want to pay attention to, and that could actually prevent you from experiencing that problem and could move you in the right direction if only you paid attention to them. So the flip side of this is now part of the problem, I think, with this introduction of pain is complex is people are now just basically ignoring the mechanical elements of this and only paying attention to the psychosocial elements of this. So you'll get people who will say, basically, in other words, like, oh, pain isn't real in the sense that it's all in your head. And it's like, no. It could very much be that your training sucks ass and you got to fix your training. Right? It may well be because you have been bench pressing with shoulder pain for 4 years and you literally just refuse to do the exercise over there that could feel really good on your shoulder, accomplishing the same thing. So I mentioned this briefly in the last video, but like I just refused to not do bench press. Like I needed to do bench press because I was so emotionally tied to it. Lo and behold, it was like the only pressing exercise that didn't feel good. But I was like, no, I got to be able to do that, brother. So, and by the way, an appropriate solution in that context would be to do the thing that doesn't hurt. Doesn't mean you have to ignore the bench press forever, but like do the dumbbell press if the bench press hurts, right? Boom, mechanical solution. So are there mechanical influences? Hell yeah. Are there non-mechanical influences? Hell yeah. If you are aware of both of them and you can ask questions, genuinely hoping for an answer, but knowing that that answer is never certain, then in my estimation, now begins the time, now begins the part of your journey where progress can be made. Because you are not being tugged in any single direction too hard such that you're ignoring other directions. You are not putting so much weight into the mechanic bucket, and you are not putting so much weight into the psychosocial bucket that you're, ignoring the other side of the coin. Now, I will say, just to finish this off, because I know this is getting long now, that a vast majority of like lifters in my experience have pains, discomforts, tightnesses for two main reasons. One, they're training, they're doing things in their training that are, let's say, not well suited to their bodies, i.e. forcing themselves to do exercises, not controlling loads, using way too much load, all the basic shit. It's like, slow down, bro. Like, slow down your reps, use a technique that doesn't hurt, and pick exercises that like don't hurt now and don't hurt in 5 weeks and 10 weeks and 20 weeks. Okay, that's like the biggest thing. The second biggest thing is just doing much more than one can handle. So slow the hell down with your actual rep speeds. Choose exercises that feel good. This sounds so obvious when it's said, but common sense is not common in essence. People only say something is common sense once someone has said something that like intuitively lands. So it's common sense to say, yeah, control your reps, pick exercises that don't hurt, and do that forever. But it's also common sense to say, control the rep speeds, make sure you're getting daily steps, don't sit for too long. And yet people are not doing these things because they're subscribed to these dumb narratives about mobility and posture and what's good and what's bad. So if by now you're still watching this video and you're like, Ben, I'm kind of confused as to what to do, that's kind of the point, which is that if someone is giving you a very simple story, that's the red flag. The red flag is not that you're confused, because guess what? Everyone's confused, ultimately. What are we even doing here? It's a miracle that we're even here to begin with. It's a miracle that we can even have these conversations. And to think that like we are the arbiters of, truth, and I know this thing for certain, that doesn't make any sense. Just call yourself on that bullshit. And then the learning will start for real, because then you're not getting constantly pulled and biased in different directions because you've subscribed to a narrative that doesn't make any sense. So anyway, I hope this helps in some way. Please, please, please. I loved last video when so many of you were sharing your thoughts. Please share your thoughts, experiences, challenges to anything that I've said. That's how we all get better. And yeah, I'll keep doing these. And again, just to repeat, I will continue to make the content that I normally make. So fear not. And if you have any requests for topics of these long form things, also drop them below.